In our last episode, we broke down your men's retreat experience, and you
Mhm.
probably got sick there. Your
Yeah,
camping,
there's
the
straight up, there's been
travel,
some,
like you probably
yeah.
got sick from the travel and the airplane and all that. Are you able to be productive? Because we actually had to postpone this episode.
The best way that I can describe it right now is it's like an out of body kind of head really full of cotton balls, simple decisions, overthinking them, complex decisions I've just had to accept this week are completely out of my realm. It's been an ego check for sure.
An ego check, how so?
So I know that we were talking about different journaling practices that I have that I've integrated. And just to give you a kind of a recap of what happened, we shot our last episode together. I think it was last Thursday or Friday. And I actually had the house to myself. So I tackled a home renovation project. And for me, normally, Andrew, to be honest, I know that we should all be getting 8 hours of sleep. For me, I operate really good off of about a 6.5 to 7 hours sleep. So all of a sudden, waking up Saturday morning, Sunday morning, Monday morning with 8 to 10 hours of sleep and still feeling absolutely gassed, completely exhausted, and still powering through this project that I really wanted to get done. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like mentally taxing by any means. Feels really good, really rewarding to have it complete. But the signs and indicators are there that if I'm that exhausted, having to take a nap in the afternoon, plugging through this, and it's not heavy lifting, it was just some painting and moving some stuff in the laundry room. And, if I'm having to take a nap in the afternoon while still getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep, like I'm not doing a very good job listening to my body.
I'll just diagnose you with COVID right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
straight up.
that sounds like COVID.
Dr.
When
Farabee.
when I had when I had COVID, this was like
Yeah.
at the peak time. I actually enjoyed it because I agree, I can relate with you in that, like, it's an ego check because you want to be high performing, you like getting things done. It's actually for me a source of fulfillment. It's a source of pleasure, even for me to be uh like, as you say, on point, getting things done. I love checking things off my to-do list. I was able to just accept it and be like, hey, like, I'm just gonna sleep in and chill and catch up on these shows people talk about, like, because I don't watch a lot of TV, and I was like
Yeah,
just binge watching all these shows, and I'm just gonna enjoy this. Like, this is just what it is. Like, I'm sick. Like, I really shouldn't be trying to come up with any big ideas right now. They're not going to be good. So I'm just going to accept this. And I think for the listeners too, regardless if you have COVID or not, like, there's likely a situation that is challenging in your life, that is something that you cannot control. I feel like the harder you try to resist something that is out of your control, like in your case, sickness, I think the worse it gets. Like, going against nature, the harder you try, the worse it gets.
for sure, man. And I wish that we had this conversation on Monday. Stay me. Straight up. Because, I've come to the same realization, right? Really try to do my best to conserve as much energy as I could on Monday. And I actually took about a 2 hour nap in the afternoon just to get prepared to lead our veteran members coaching call,
Right.
to make
Okay.
sure that I showed up with as much energy, gave the men there a heads up, like, hey, this is a scoop. I'm going to do my absolute best. Thankfully, those men, such a great intimate group that we know each other so well, having worked
Right.
together
Yeah.
in such
That's
close
every
proximity.
every Monday.
And as soon as that call ended, I mean, I was done. I think I was in bed within about 30 minutes. And when I woke up,
Pete gave it
gave
his
it, I
all on
gave it
that
my all,
call. He
man.
just collapses after he
Yeah.
signs off.
The night before I go to bed, usually I outline what my objectives are for the next day. I didn't do it
Mhm.
Monday night, obviously, but what are those three big items that I want to knock off
That's
the
right.
following day? So I got up Tuesday morning and I started writing those out. And then I was like, having that mental struggle, looking at, like, Pete, 4 days now, mentally operating at what feels like 30 to 40%, energy level just not there, inability to focus on detail and stay focused in general. And so I cracked open kind of more freehand writing journal, and boom, I use this on a lot of coaching calls as well, right? It's like, what's the challenge that I'm having right now? And it was exactly that: mental quickness, mental sharpness, and physical energy, right? And how that spills over to all other areas of life, of like just even looking at emotionally, of, you know, getting frustrated with things a lot quicker, et cetera, et cetera. But that mental sharpness, that exhaustion being the big one. So that's my challenge. And it's like, well, what advice would I give to somebody else? And it's like, rest, man. Just take rest, relax. And that's a huge ego check question for myself, because I know that for myself, Andrew, I know that for you and for the audience listening, it comes down to that: treat yourself as you would treat others. I think that most men listening to this podcast, I know the men in our community and I know our coaches, right? We're good people. But quite often, we're going out and treating other people better than what we treat ourselves. And I know that I do this frequently. So it's that check and balance to come in. And what advice would I give somebody else? Like, I got to step out and I've got to take my own advice right now. So if these roles were reversed, Andrew, and you were approaching me, telling me all this, I'd be like, just go sleep, surrender to it, enjoy that time. But I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself, because we put way too much pressure on ourselves.
Absolutely. You said something really big. We often treat others better than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to give advice to me, you would be telling me like, hey, relax, like rest, like just try and enjoy this moment. That is a very common thing amongst men,
Mm-hmm.
is treating others better than they treat themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's in our DNA, going back 10,000 years ago, right? Like, we are the protector, we are the provider, but it's when it's at the expense of ourselves,
It can go too far.
it can go too far.
It can go too far and it can become a habit and it can become a source of approval.
Yeah.
Where I feel it can become too far, where now we're reliant on other people's approval at the expense of our own self, or in
Exactly.
some cases respect, or in some cases even health.
Mm-hmm. And that's just it, man. And it's just like looking at that, you know, the analogy that I like to use is that, you know, just checking my own internal bucket or cup, if you will. And it's like, I understand that things that I do for myself, things that I do for my own work, for my business, for clients, relationship, there are certain things that are going to drain my cup occasionally. But if I'm coming into the day and my cup is, just to pull out an arbitrary number here, 30 or 40% full, and it's like, oh, I got to accomplish all these things. Sure, for myself, for my own business, I got to get out and get that run in. I got to try to hit the gym, whatever that is. Like, no, you need to fill that cup up. You can't work your way out of this. You can't do something physical to get out of this right now. You just need water, good nutrition, vitamins, sleep.
That's what nature is telling you to do. The law of nature is change. Like
Mm-hmm.
nature changes, seasons change. There are things that we just cannot control, and there is no point in arguing, complaining, trying to resist it. Like resisting nature is really, you're like resisting life. Like you're going against it, and nature just wants you to rest. That's like nature's like your own body's giving you signals that say,
Yeah.
hey, Pete, we can't do this. Let's chill. And to fight it is it's just going against nature. So it's accepting that right now you're experiencing a change, but in this case, this is a temporary change. I think there's a
Absolutely.
really big lesson here in that one day it may not be temporary, in that this is what it might feel like to be an old aging person, human. And in your case, this is temporary. This will pass in a few days, by next week. And so there's a gratitude in like having your mental clarity back and having that energy back. It's like, oh wow, like I'm back. And
Yeah.
it's something that we take for granted. I know I certainly can take that for granted. I think many listeners could relate with that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, wow. Like, so when you're sick, it's almost like there's a lesson here in that one day this could be your default state. You might wake up and that's all you can. You're like, oh, like I remember when my father was sick and he eventually passed, but that was his default state for
Mhm.
the last couple of years of just being extremely lethargic, unable to think clearly, like just taking naps all the time. Like that was his default. Like he really was ineffective.
Yeah, man. I know that you bring up a really good point there with recognizing that it's temporary, because the conversations that I've had with myself, that ego getting in the way, that push, that drive, that pressure that nobody's putting on me except me, of, oh no, is this going to be my default state? It's like, well, yeah, if you keep pushing this and don't
Right.
get the rest that you need to recover, you're going to drag this out.
Exactly.
Because I did that the
The
first
harder you,
round of COVID. I did that the first round of COVID. I know
yeah,
better.
yeah. The harder you fight nature, like the worse it usually gets.
Yeah.
Like I surf, and so often I see tourists, I mean, or they're new to the beach. I can just tell they're coming in, they get caught in a rip current,
Mm.
and I can just see it. They panic, they freak out, and they try and fight the rip current. And they look like they, one, aren't even that good of swimmers. And so then they fatigue themselves. The lifeguards see it. I'm not just watching out of pleasure, like, oh, this person is possibly drowning. The lifeguard is coming. There's lifeguards everywhere here in San Diego. And I see people get saved all the time. But I always see people fighting nature out
Mm-hmm.
in the ocean. And obviously, what you do is you swim parallel, relax, and then swim out of it, swim parallel
Yeah,
to the beach. But fighting nature can lead to worse outcomes. And in this example, it can lead to death.
for sure. And it's this is a very small, insignificant me problem right now. Like, I mean, my overall health is not truly at risk. I don't believe this is, I've overcome this before. I'm young, I'm healthy. I've got all my needs met. Basically, what are we, Thursday today? So in just kind of surrendering to listening to the body, getting more of that rest, getting more of that rejuvenation that I've needed the past 48, 60 hours or so, I was reflecting on how this tiny experience right here reminds me so much of the bigger challenges, those bigger seasons that we've worked with men in the program, in the community on. There's one individual that um, I remember very distinctly had lost, I think, three people that he was very close to: a family member,
Mm-hmm.
a mentor, and a colleague,
Wow.
all within about a 3-4 month period.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so massive grief that he didn't understand. And remember, he kind of went dark for a little while, which is understandable. We talk about some of those fighting natures of like what happens. This could come in the form of breakups, of a grief of a lost job, of losing a job, of grief of actually losing people in physical form that you were close with, whatever that is. And he kind of disappeared for about a month or so, and then he came on, which was really awesome to see, and just opened up that he was struggling, that he was starting to succumb to vices a little bit again, that he was having a really challenging time, and just to sit there and work with him. And he never brought up anything about the losses. And so just asking, why, what's underneath of that, why, what's underneath of that, right? And then popped it open that, oh, I've lost these people.
So you got to the truth. What was he saying on the surface?
I could get the sense he was talking about all the things that he had on the go, trying to build business, trying to coach and mentor new colleagues. Like, he runs his own business,
Uh-huh.
wanting to show up as a better version for himself, trying to work on his physical fitness, show up better in relationship with his wife and for his kids. A lot there. And it's like, I could feel, I'm just listening to him, and I can hear his tone of voice, how he's talking, and it's like he's overwhelmed. Like, he's beyond the overwhelm period, right? He's at the burnout phase. He's been overwhelmed for so long that he's at the burnout.
that it has become his default. He's almost accepted that burnout is my default, and this is just how I'm supposed to feel, with this sense of like anxiety or this high
Yeah.
pressure, and that's the default. It can become accepted, and then you obviously are less effective, or you experience a lot less joy and fulfillment when you're just burned out.
Yeah. And he was finding that alcohol was coming back into the scene a little bit for him. Not out of control, but
Yeah.
it was moving in a direction he didn't want it to.
It's slow. It creeps in.
Creeps in.
It creeps in. The thing about alcohol is it does change the state. Drugs, alcohol, these things change the state. And if someone is wanting a state change, it works.
Mm-hmm. Some of that edge off the pain, the hurt, as well as video games for the other one.
Mm. So almost in a sense, hiding.
Yeah. And so when we started drawing down deeper on that, that's when he opened up about the amount of loss.
Mm.
These three people. And I'll tell you, Andrew, it was really fascinating because I take a lot of pride in the men, and once they wake up, right, it turns our community into a truly high functioning, high performance group of men. We could talk forever about some of the victories.
There's nothing better than being with a community of guys who have woken up and are going after the vision that they want in their lives, the vision based off their own values, based off what they want, not what we tell them.
Mm-hmm.
But to empower them to get to that place, and then to surround yourself and hear from other men also there, is extremely powerful. It's hard to find locally. It can be done 100%, but it can be hard locally, especially not everyone lives in environments where it's even around them.
Yeah.
Like speaking
White Horse, Yukon.
For reference, like, what's the population of your community? Of your
28,000, man.
28,000.
The men that I get the opportunity to surround, like for you and I to be having this chat, and I continue to learn and grow from you, from the other coaches. I learn and grow every time I'm on a coaching call and leading the other men. There's the amount of information and knowledge and experience that I pick up from such a wide diversity, primarily North America, but people I would never have the opportunity to.
That's right. That is the benefit of just being a part of a program. Obviously, I'll do a shameless plug. If you're interested in what we offer, just check out kfmcoach.com. But it is important that men have strong community of men who are going after a vision and are working through challenges. That is life. That is growth. And that is, if you're not growing, then you're decaying. And that's when the vices can really take over, because they work. They don't work for long-term life success, but they do work in terms of, I don't want to face reality. Let me do these vices. That works.
Yeah, man. It's, the analogy I've been using for that is being on the court, right? Using that basketball analogy. And I got to laugh at myself sometimes because it feels like I'm just out there shooting a lot of air balls, but I'm not on the sidelines.
That's big.
Yeah.
I mean, most people in sports who have like the most touchdowns, for instance, also have the most interceptions, or like most points per game is also followed by most missed shots per game. But that statistic isn't highlighted. Like if you look at Kobe or LeBron or even Jordan, they also have some of the highest missed shots per game as well.
Yeah.
So are you shooting?
Are you shooting?
Question for the audience. Like, are you shooting?
Are you shooting? Are you on the court?
So that's your ego right there, because right now you don't feel like you're on the court. You're sick.
That's exactly it.
You don't feel like you're in the arena, and you don't like being on the sidelines. I wouldn't say you're on the sidelines or you're in the audience. Like you're kind of on the bench, and everybody goes back to the bench to rest. LeBron, Kobe, Jordan, they go back to the bench. The coach takes them out for a period of time strategically to let them rest.
The way that this analogy is lining up, because we're just entering the fourth quarter of the year. I feel like I've had so I did my quarterly review. I walked
Wow.
especially the high performing men and the veterans call through just a couple weeks ago, a quarterly review, just looking at everything that we've accomplished, making sure that we are on point in alignment, how we're going to finish off this year. And I believe that the fourth quarter of the year is just like the fourth quarter of a basketball game, of a football game. It's the most important one, right? Like
Right.
when everyone else is run down, gasping for air, it's like we're just going to keep outpacing, outperforming. And so this is that additional level of pressure that I've got on myself. Like I just completed mine. I've got these like great ambitious goals. They're challenging, they're relevant, they're realistic. And now I feel like I've just been benched
Yes.
for a
And
week or two,
and the clock is ticking, and you're
and the
not
clock is
in the
ticking.
arena. You're not on the court, and the clock is ticking.
Yeah. And where that breaks down into like what I've got on my whiteboard in front of me, what I want to accomplish for this month, for this week, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like, just put that aside. Like it's okay. Cause I've seen it. So I've had to like wipe it off, really check that of like, this is a rest week, because you got the choice to maybe drag this out, show up 50%, 40% this week, maybe it's 50% next week, maybe it's 60% the week after if I keep trying to push, or you can take the 1 week or whatever it takes to get to that 80%, 90%, 100%, and you're going to be far more effective. Again, taking that third person perspective of somebody else approaching me with this challenge, I would ask them the question, whether this is a teammate that they've got at work, maybe in a professional sports realm or on a sports team. It's like, would you rather that person showing up 50% every single day for a month, or 100% for a week?
Because fighting it will make it so that you might not be able to come in
Absolutely.
at all into the fourth quarter. So accepting this phase and respecting it, because there's still value in not being in the court all the time, and
Totally.
being able to step back and look at what's happening on the court, and to reflect on what's happening on the court and in the past, your life or your relationships, your career, and having some of that time to step back. So like there's still value here in not always being go, 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 go.
For sure. And there's no life threatening goal or objective that I have this quarter, that no one's put those deadlines on me except me.
Yeah. Like you've almost created your own
I've created my
your
own
own
self
stress.
accountability system
Yeah.
that I've got to make sure that I'm accountable to myself first, and that takes priority. My health takes priority over that always. And sometimes it just takes a couple days, right, of really tuning into that body. And so that's where I am now. And it's to just I'm okay taking, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday so far to just simmer
Mm.
and to really listen to the body. When I feel like getting some rest, take that rest. And to bring this back to that coaching session
Right.
with that individual, because you talk about these seasons, and like I said, this is such a minuscule. I know that by this time next week I'll be at that 80-90%. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very confident in that. But you look at some of those larger seasons, something like this man going through this extreme loss in his life,
Yeah.
three people very close to him, and surrounding himself in this community of high performing men. There's a little bit of that additional external pressure there. He's got the internal pressure on himself of what he wants to achieve, what he wants to get done. He's feeling a little bit of that external pressure as well. And it was such a beautiful learning opportunity, Andrew, for everybody there, for all of the men. I think that was a fairly large coaching call, and for everybody to recognize, because the advice that I gave him was basically throwing that question directly out to him, like, if anybody else approached you with this, what advice would you give them?
What did he say?
Reduce the vices and take time to process. It was that simple, man. And I said, so what does that look like for you? How are you going to give yourself that space? And so we worked on practices that he's had in the past that he forgot about.
Yeah. It's
Right?
easy to
Doing some of
forget
it.
what was
Yeah.
working. Like even in times of success, we're like, oh, I don't need to do the journal. I don't need the personal development. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to do, I'm good. Like I'm doing good. But that's
Yeah.
one of the best times to really be journaling, to be working on the personal, because you're in a really good upward state. And that's the stuff that's working. Like, what are you doing? Like
Yeah.
what is happening in your life? Like, what are you doing that has led to these results? We often turn to personal development only when we're struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true, eh? And that was another piece, was for him to go out and actually seek out a good grief counselor to unpackage some of those inner thoughts, the pieces from the past that were showing up, and then to also ensure that he was getting, and I made sure that he got to those Wednesday night calls with myself and with a lot of those other men around, so that it was a consistent place for him to continue showing up, so that we could continue to focus on the progress moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Progress is key.
Just really starting to rebuild that foundation and build up. You could just see the tension come off of him, because I think that he was expecting, a lot of really big action items that he needed to take, and I recognize that we're all about taking that massive value, but in some of these big seasons of life, and for all of the audience, it's not, you can't just paint it as like, oh, it's acceptable for me to not show up and to succumb to vices or anything like that. But it comes down to ensuring that when those big events happen, that you do give yourself the space to be able to process them, but keep an eye on those indicators. It may feel like you're in a holding pattern, and that's okay if the bar just stays where it's at. But when those vices start coming in, when you start seeing that life going in the direction you don't want it to go, it's a key indicator. Catch that early. And I'm so grateful that he did, because that took a tremendous amount of courage. In that vulnerable state, for him to reach out for the support then, and just to be able to catch it within a few weeks that, hey, like, these vices are starting to come in. This is not the direction that I want to go. Because then he's feeling the guilt on top of it, the shame.
Mm-hmm.
He knows better. He's overcome a lot of these. And just being able to open that up, open his mind up, that, hey, man, like, that's a lot to process. It's understandable that there's a lot of pain underneath the surface. Meanwhile, you've got all these pressures, all these goals on yourself. Take those off. Limit your workday. I don't care if you play some video games occasionally. I don't care if you have a drink occasionally. But maybe have those as a reward for giving yourself the time, the grace, the space to connect with yourself. To maybe share that drink with a friend, with your wife, and just open up, talk to them about what's going on for you. Be intentional with that time that you've got set aside to play a video game for a little bit. Completely acceptable, completely necessary to a point as well. And I think that it's a piece, Andrew, that isn't talked about often enough, and especially in our media these days, is that we as men, like, we want to be high performers, absolutely. But when these big life-changing events happen, you must give yourself some of that space. Take that pressure off. Talk to your clients, talk to your team, talk to your partners, talk to your friends. Let them know, like, hey, there's something big going on for me. And those are the big ones that come up for me, that really will hit us mentally and emotionally, really affect us spiritually, and for sure physically as well. Our grief of loss and breakups as well, right? It's something that there's an upset in our mind. There's a piece that was there before in our life that is no longer there. That piece of homeostasis that we've been in, of this person's been in my life, and now they're gone. That it takes time to rewire the brain on what life looks like without that individual there any longer.
There's change where we choose the change, such as I am going to quit my job. I
Mm-hmm.
am going to break up with this person. I am going to move to a new city, which can be empowering because we feel like we're in control of change. But when change is not by our choice, I have been blindsided by my partner and she wants a breakup or divorce, or she cheated, or I get fired from my job,
Mm-hmm.
or rent has skyrocketed, or something has happened in the real estate in my community and I have to move. It no longer works here. Like that's when we can then reach a state of a crisis where this is not change that I chose. And so it can feel disempowering. And in that moment, it really is perspective is so important whenever the change is not by our choosing. To you can regain, you can't control what happened, but you can control your perspective of what happened
Mm-hmm.
and the story that you're going to write about what happened. Because a breakup that happens to you, or divorce, this is a tragic loss, especially if you were deeply in love and it's not something that you wanted. You wanted to be with that person, but the perspective of a loss can sometimes really change, or it can always change, so that it then becomes empowering. Such as in a breakup, you could obviously really look at the relationship and really get real with if this relationship was truly what you wanted, or were you actually just settling and you didn't have the courage to the breakup. Like, and maybe it should have been done years ago, but it was just, you got, like you said, you got used to just that homeostasis, that level of comfort. I mean, how many people have gone through a breakup and then they can look back and say that was almost everyone can look back, if you really were able to analyze and look at and review and reflect on the relationship and the lessons learned and how you showed up. Like there's so much gold if you are conscious and awake
Yeah.
to see what you have gained. Because in that breakup, through that journey and through that growth of the post breakup or post divorce experience, it could be one of the highest like growth journeys for a man, because you're dealing with so much when you have that kind of a loss. Your
Yeah.
ego, the rejection of somebody you love, watching someone you love transform into another person who you almost can't even relate with, it can be shocking, let alone just losing that connection, intimacy, the sex, and then feeling alone.
Mm-hmm.
It, but the perspective can empower you of how you're going to view this experience. And maybe someone's listening, like, I'm not going through a breakup, but there is still unexpected change that is a part of life. Unexpected change is coming and happening for everyone who's listening, and having perspective of the situation is where you can find your power and become the hero of the unexpected change rather than a victim. There is no value in being a victim as a strong grounded man. There is no value in living as a victim.
Yeah.
There is always there is always a way to find your power and to grow from this experience, whether you chose it or not.
For sure. And I think of these examples of these bigger seasons that we're talking about, loss of somebody close to you in your life, whether that's through death, whether that's through, something like a breakup. And looking back at those kind of micro journeys that we were talking about, myself with COVID, or a Taurus or somebody fighting that riptide, trying to fight that law of nature. I think that holds you back of accepting the reality. And so when you're ego driven like that, and you're trying to fight reality, trying to fight nature, you're not going to get the result that you're looking for. And I think that will naturally put you into that victimhood mentality.
Mm-hmm. Often the worse it gets. Fighting nature,
Yeah.
often the worse the situation will become. So you're not even living in reality, which means you can't even solve the problem.
No, because you can't even accept it for what it is. And you're dumping all of this energy into a losing battle.
And into blame, into pointing fingers,
Yeah.
into complaining, into feeling like a victim. Therefore, I am going to now engage in vices because this thing happened to me. This thing happened to me. So now I have an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I've tried
common,
everything.
right? It's common for someone who's experienced heavy loss, whether that's through a breakup or unexpected death, to then say, well, I'm allowed to. I'm
Yeah.
allowed to drink heavily and to do drugs. In fact,
Yeah.
I'm going to abuse these because now I'm allowed to. I've accepted that I'm a victim of this situation.
Yeah. It's been a really big practice for myself, Andrew. I don't want to go too far down the topic of getting into the ego right now, but we as men, we should be leading from our ego 80% of the time. I do believe that. And I know there's
Why
a
is
lot
that?
of,
Why is that? I think a lot of people would disagree.
yeah,
Why do you say that?
I think that it's, again, this is just kind of my philosophy. My ego is what keeps me driven. It's what keeps me disciplined. It's what keeps me moving forward and keeps me moving in alignment as well with the goals that I set out. I believe it's very important to come back to what I would describe as being my king, where my truth is, my purpose, the archetype that will tap whichever other archetype that I need, whether that's in health and fitness, whether that's in relationship, whether that's in business, you name it, in social journeys, whoever that is at the time. But I think that a lot of those other archetypes are ego driven. And that's what keeps me on point. That's what keeps a lot of that sharpness. One of the big things that I've been practicing recently in this men's retreat was really big for this as well. And I've had a lot of growth in this area over just the past several months, specifically over the summer. But it's just surrendering to circumstances. And that's helped me to really come back to my truth quite a bit more, because we want to be in alignment with our truth. We want to stand for our truth. I do believe that going and harness, again, my own philosophy. I know there's a lot out there about killing the ego, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I believe that harnessing the ego to serve that truth works for me.
That's interesting. There is obviously a lot of conversation around
I know.
eliminating the ego and that it is bad and that it's coming from a darker place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is that the ego has power, and within that power, you can channel it towards your truth, which is not dark energy, which is actually positive energy that has great impact.
Exactly. That truth, that vision that I've set in front of me is usually based on an internal feeling and a moral compass. The objectives that I set to accomplish that, the more tangible items that help me hold accountable, help hold myself accountable, and how I'm going to get there. I believe that my ego is a huge driver behind that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge source of energy and power.
And me personally, I don't think that the ego needs to be eliminated
No.
from life. I feel that many of man's greatest inventions and companies and movements have been somewhat driven by the ego. Steve Jobs had a massive ego. All these equipment around me is all Apple. So,
Yeah.
there is value, I believe, in the ego if channeled in the right way. The problem can then become, though, if it goes too far, it can then become quite destructive and a
Mm-hmm.
source of pain. An example could be in your situation. I don't think it's too far, but just as an example, where you don't feel like you're in the arena, and it's creating a lot of pressure. You feel like you should be doing better. You're not allowing yourself, at first to just accept that you're sick and that you should just be doing really nothing or as little as possible, really. It is just a part of life. The ego is really hurt severely during a breakup and divorce. If you have a high ego and you get rejected and you are someone who is growing and performing like in life, and you feel like you're doing so well, to get rejected can then become much more painful than someone whose ego is less of a driver in their life. So there are pros and cons to this. I myself, when I've experienced a breakup, the rejection, there's a term for it actually, is when I was working with a therapist, it's like men who are high performing, who have an ego, it can fuel a lot of their success. It can go against them in times of unexpected change, which is what this whole conversation is about, is the law of nature and accepting change. And so the ego can feel like it can control reality so much that it can beat or overwhelm nature itself. There can be unnecessary suffering as a result of the ego. However, there can be also immense gain because of the ego. So it's playing with like nuclear energy.
Yeah.
There is very positive benefit of nuclear energy, but that energy, if channeled incorrectly, can be used in obvious ways that can be quite destructive.
I think making sure that it's coming back to serve that truth, serve that that higher purpose, that higher mission. And I'm just kind of laughing right now. I'm looking up at my whiteboard because in all of this, I've got it written right up here. So I've been reading this on a daily basis for about the past 3 months. It is not about more effort. Let go, surrender, trust yourself 100%.
Surrender. Explain that. Some people might hear
Big
that
word.
and say, well, I'm not gonna surrender. Like, what's going on here?
I love that you picked that one out because that was the one.
That's my ego. I'm like, hey, I'll never surrender. Like,
absolutely. That is the one word that is exactly why that is up there. That is the power word that I struggled with the most. And that's exactly why this is written up there, is the word surrender. Because ego, and I'm still overcoming this when I see the word surrender. It's much less now than it was 3 months ago, but it felt like, oh, I'm going to roll over, going to lay down, roll over. And it's not about that at all. How that word has formed for me over the past several months is surrendering, is accepting and surrendering to the circumstance, whatever that circumstance is that I'm currently in, of not trying to fight that reality, of not putting in more effort to fight that, and to bring me quicker from an ego-driven perspective into that truth, trusting myself 100%, trusting my internal moral compass of right and wrong, seeing it from that perspective, and proceeding forward from there, whatever that circumstance is.
I like the word acceptance. Surrender to me, like in my mind, I'm like, I will never surrender.
Exactly.
I'm like Braveheart and William Wallace and Braveheart.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And for me, it was I needed something, just knowing my own psyche, my own ego. I've tried the word acceptance, but it didn't hold enough weight. I needed the word surrender to actually trigger me. I would ask the audience, where in your life are you fighting something that's holding you back from seeing the reality? Are you able to surrender to the reality, accept the reality for what it is? Let go of that ego for a moment. Trust your heart and gut. See the different views. And yes, determine an action plan forward and bring in that ego to work towards it. work towards a solution, work towards progress.
That is powerful. I think it's just a gut reaction if someone has been broken up with or divorced, blindsided, that they want to fix.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even accept her emotions, really. It's like, no, no, no. I'll fix this. Like I have ignored reality. I've ignored that she no longer feels the way that or used to feel. And the ego can try drive you to do insane things post breakup or post
Mm-hmm.
divorce, things that you never thought you would do or say,
Yeah.
because you're just so fixated on fixing on no, 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 that like you disregard reality, which is that she has changed, her emotions has changed, her vision for the future has changed, it's not aligned with yours. And so almost every action taken from this frame makes the situation worse from the very thing that you want, which is I'm trying to fix this, which is good and admirable, and you're fighting for your relationship. But though sometimes the way to fight for that relationship is to accept reality and live in that reality. And if you're trying to get someone back, then reattract. But fighting reality will often cause her to never return
No.
if she is if you are fighting her desires in that moment, and it can then become very permanent, because the guy can do things that can be quite humiliating in an act of trying to save his relationship, but it is coming across as very weak and that you do not respect her and that it is all about you and that the ego is running the show too far.
Yeah.
Because having control over your ego could be accepting the situation and then learning from the situation and growing as a man.
So, Andrew, let me ask you, what advice or what steps would you give somebody to just accepting reality, whether that's the breakup, whether that's the grief of a loss, whether that's a loss of a job, insane housing markets, inflation, whatever challenge might show up to them? What advice would you give to somebody in order to surrender and accept the reality and stop fighting it?
This is happening for me. Where is the benefit? Where is the gold? And from there, you have regained your power. And when you are acting from your power versus a place of scarcity or a place of fear or a place of desperation, that frame will always fail in that situation
Yeah.
of a tragic loss or a breakup or divorce. Fear, desperation, scarcity, you want to avoid that at all costs and you want to live in your power. And so
Yeah.
by choosing the perspective of a strong grounded man, oh, this is happening for me, I need this on my journey, there is gold here for me to uncover, or to either reattract her or to either
Yeah.
take this and carry it forward to a new relationship and starting fresh with this gold, with these lessons, so that now I actually have a much stronger foundation in this relationship as an example. Let's just say that as the last relationship didn't have these lessons in place. I didn't have the foundation of that home in place, and it was built off of a very weak foundation. And so now I can build anew with the right mindset in place, with the right lessons. And so just how can there be gold in this situation and how can I benefit? Another thing too is like the loss of, let's say it's not a relationship. Like I had lost my father, like you can't
Yeah.
go and get a new father, right? Like a relationship, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to heal, grow, and I'll get a new relationship. It'll be better. So that wouldn't apply to someone where it's like, hey, I lost like my best friend, or I lost someone very close to me, a family member, a parent, a sibling. I allowed myself to suffer for longer than necessary, and it's accepted too. So that's another part. Like you lose a parent, like your your peers, people accept your suffering. They're like, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I would handle that. Like, oh my gosh. But what I know is that my father would not want me to be suffering, and that at this point, I am creating my own suffering and I'm living as a victim. I am allowing vices into my life. I'm not in control of the situation. My father would not want me to suffer. I'm sure he'd be like, hey, like mourn a little bit. Okay. Like I meant something, right? Like do the mourning, please. Can you give me some mourning? Of course. Well, I definitely did that for a lot longer than necessary. But then after a certain point, like that becomes your default. You're just like, oh, I'm living as this person who lost his father. I lost him younger than when most people would. And I have this thing that like is causing me pain that you guys don't have. And it gives me a lot of attention. Like whenever I would mention that or people ask how I'm doing and I would share that, like people, the whole conversation just shifts to that and you get a lot of attention. It is not an empowering life. And what my father would want is for me to be living in an impeccable life, just an amazing life. He'd want me to be happy, laughing, successful, healthy. Would not want me in bed crying. He would not want me living with this as like a shell of who I could be. He wouldn't want that. So why am I living like that? Like he doesn't even want that. I have created this and it's lasting for way too long. So that's how I would talk to the person who's lost someone unexpectedly or just lost someone that it's not replaceable.
Yeah.
And that's accepting nature is like, hey, that's was gonna happen. There was nothing I could have done. I wasn't planning for that. But that is nature. Unexpected loss is nature. And the perspective of how you view that will dictate many years of your life post that unexpected life, because that energy that you're showing up to in work with this victim mentality or like I've had a loss, like, oh, I'm suffering, I'm depressed. I was like, oh, I've never tried antidepressants. I should try them now. Like I should allow myself
Sure.
to the pharmaceutical world. I'm allowed to now. Like this is very real. This isn't just like, oh, like it's a seasonal like depression. Like this is a very real pain. And now I'm going to open myself up to the pharmacy. But some doctors, when they hear that you're going through that kind of a loss, they almost sympathize with you and they're like, oh my gosh, you must be going through so much. Like, here, what do you need? What do you need? Like, what do you need? I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm ordering prescription drugs right now. Like, I want that. I want to try that. I've always wanted to try that. Let's get that on the
Wow.
menu. That's not the life I want. And I know where that can go. I have an addictive nature. I like to be addicted to my own progress in life and health versus billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies. That's how I'd respond to that perspective. Like the law of nature, we must accept, and then we must choose the empowering perspective because it will make you stronger. Guaranteed, you will become stronger. There's a level of strength that I now have in the loss of my father. I've dealt with some real shit. I can say it today with like absolute confidence that I've accepted the loss of my father and that I am a stronger man as a result. And he would want me to as well. He would not want me at this, it's been several years. He would not want me still holding this against myself, carrying this to others. Like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this way. Like, but there's a level of like humanity that I've also gained in that like I can really connect with people who've experienced loss.
Yeah.
I got invited to a party and we went to like it wasn't really a party, it was a charity party. So it's like what? So it's like a sophisticated party. So because it's a charity, right? We're donating towards underprivileged children here in San Diego was the charity. I like to support these causes. And instantly I looked at this guy. I noticed a sadness in him. And I just looked him in the eye and I was like, how are you doing? And he looked at me in the eye and he knew. He knew that I had been through some shit just based off my presence and how I asked him the question. And he was like, my dad's dying right now. And I looked him in the eye and he's like, you've been through this. And I was like, I have. I've been through it. The stage before and then the actual event. And I didn't tell him that I lost my father. I just told him that I understand and I've been through it. He later uncovered it on his own, but I didn't like lead with that. Like, oh, well, I've lost my father. So like I'm one upping you right now. Like I've actually I just let him uncover it and I just connected with him. But we became instant connection.
Yeah,
And I felt more connected to that guy than there were other people at this charity party that I had known for years. But instantly, I just met this guy, but we were hanging out, we were talking, having a good time, connecting, talking about it a little bit, but there for the charity. There's a level of connection in humanity that like I
for
could
sure.
feel and really
Sharing a lived experience.
right. Mm-hmm. And that's
And
that's a gift. I mean
yeah,
that's a gift in itself. And instead of just instead of just being like me too, man, like
yeah,
and just like falling together and just like, oh, let's just do drugs together.
yeah. And it's Andrew, thanks for sharing that. That's there's a lot of power in your story there, and very vulnerable. And right at the start, this all spun off of asking the question of, what advice would you give for somebody to surrender and to accept reality and not fight it, right? And your exact words was, why is this happening for me?
Or this is happening for me. This
Yeah.
is happening for me.
Yeah, this is happening
This is
for me.
happening for me. Why is this happening to me would be a victim. That'd be a victim language. This is happening for me. This is not happening against me.
Yeah.
This is for me. And I must make that so. I must uncover the
That's
goal.
the
I must
piece that I love
uncover
there.
the
That's the
lesson.
piece that I really appreciate there. And for the audience to recognize as well that, you know, um, this is a question that I ask myself in time of crisis, or when shit hits the fan, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
Is why is this happening for me, or this is happening for me? And you mentioned about uncovering the gold, uncovering the nuggets along the way. Recognize that you may not see those. It's always, you stay, using that analogy, you keep digging, or using the analogy of the basketball court, you stay on the court. Those are going to get exposed over time. Don't expect to see all of those. And what a piece of gold right there, Andrew, of you sharing that experience, that connection, because that wouldn't have existed. And very possibly you were the lifeline for that man that night.
Mm-hmm.
And what a beautiful
He
piece of
was
gold right
very
there.
he was very sad. He
Yeah.
was very I could tell he was going through something interpersonal.
And without you needing to say anything, and him picking up on the energy and him recognizing you've been through this. So powerful. That level of connection, that level of empathy. So, men, if you're listening to this, look at exactly that and just understand that you keep digging, you stay on the court, no matter what's happened to you. It's happened for you. And the nuggets will continue to be exposed over time.
Absolutely. That's a key point. You may not have the goal or the lessons right away. And then so you can be
No.
like, well, I don't know. Oh, how is their lessons? I don't see them. I don't have them. Therefore, I'm still a victim.
Yeah.
But that yeah, I am still learning the lessons. I am
Yeah.
still growing from that experience. It was not like, oh, that was years ago. Therefore, it is done. That tree is still growing and I'm still watering it and
Love
understanding
that.
the situation more. And I'm still continuing to grow. So the full
Yeah.
fruit of that experience is yet to be fully complete. My aunt has an avocado tree, and I remember when she planted it, I was so excited. Like the next time I went there as a kid, and there was no avocados, and she's like, "Oh, it's gonna take like 10 or 15 years before we ever see an avocado."
Yeah.
But now that tree is the biggest damn tree ever, and there are so many avocados that come out of it. You can give them away to all your friends, and there's just so many. And
Wow.
so it takes time for that to truly give its fruit. It is difficult at the onset of any unexpected change, but you can
Yeah.
reclaim power in perspective of the situation and accepting the situation, and then you're going to progress. You are going to improve and progress just a little bit over time. I am good with my father passing. I used to say that and be like, oh, like there would be this level of like pain in
Yeah.
my
Feel
chest,
the
and like
tension.
I would, it would, all this emote, I wouldn't even be able to talk about it. I'd be pausing. I'd be like, all these flashbacks. I'm still learning, but I'm not in pain, but I am still growing. I'm not complete with the journey, but I'm out of that stage. And that can be done with perspective.
And I think that's the, regardless of the situation for anybody looking at their own life in a moment of crisis or a season of life, um, is that the lessons, it's very rare that they're immediately exposed. I think that there's some pieces that you can recognize pretty quickly of like how, depending on the level of self-awareness, the level of growth and development, the level of investment in yourself, that you can identify fairly quickly how you showed up and some lessons learned for yourself internally. But it goes so much further beyond that over time.
100%.
Yeah. And
100%.
so I think that that's a piece right there as well. It's just surrendering to that you're not going to expose all
Yeah.
the gold nuggets
Right.
within the first 48 hours.
Right. But you are going to plant the tree, and you do know that in time, this tree is going to grow
Yeah.
immensely, and it is going to, well, if it's a fruit tree, it is going to have fruit or
Yeah.
it is going to flower. Yeah.
And have that abundance to give out around you.
And you'll have things to share. There was no way that my aunt could ever have eaten all those avocados. She had so much to share with others. And what I'm saying is you will have so much to share
Yeah.
with others. It's another part of you. There's a level of humanness that I feel I have in those situations.
But I think especially today, and one of the big definitions of being a man, of showing up in society for your family, for your friends, for your partner, for your business, for your colleagues, for everybody, just showing up for this world, is recognizing that you're there to absolutely celebrate and create times of great joy. And you are also there to provide that container and to hold the space during times of great sorrow.
Deep connection comes as a result. We're all human, having a very human experience is actually just another way of looking at unexpected
Yeah.
change and loss. This is just, you're human. Accept that. Just like you have to go, I'm pretty hungry right now. I don't know about you. Like I
I'm
have
pretty
food.
hungry.
That's just a part of life. And you don't really complain about that, but we complain about
Mm-hmm.
things that just are not in our favor. We should accept it as just a part of life and go, oh, I'm human. I'm human. Okay, got it. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
sick right now. You're not God. You're not a robot. Do you want to be a robot? Like you're a human having a very human experience. So respond, not react, respond accordingly.
Absolutely. Love it, man.
That should be the cut. So for those listening who want to learn how you can work with Pete and I, and we also have other awesome coaches on our team, and we have over 300 really awesome clients, awesome men, all on incredible journeys with great visions moving towards them, then just visit kfmcoach.com. That's kfmcoach.com. And you'll basically speak with a coach and we'll see if it's a good fit or not.